The watch market has 7 levels. Some are winning right now, some are quietly losing, and 2 of them, the ones most people are desperately trying to get into, are the most dangerous places to put your money in 2026. This is the full map, level 7 to level 1. Let's go. Starting where the air is thinnest, level 7. The Momentum Flex. Richard Mille, Jacob & Co. The speculative ceiling. Picture a room in Basel, 2019. A watch executive is holding a skull-shaped tourbillon that costs $4 million. He's explaining to a journalist that the skull is not a gimmick, that the complication took 4 years to develop, that the client who commissioned it is a serious collector. Nobody in that room believes any of it, and everyone is buying anyway. That's level 7. Richard Mille and Jacob & Co. represent the absolute ceiling of watch pricing. Watches that cost as much as private aircraft. Watches worn by athletes, rappers, and people whose net worth changes by double-digit millions on quarterly earnings calls. The logic was never about horology, it was always about access. The watch is evidence that you belong to a tier of the economy that the rest of us can barely conceptualize. And for a while, specifically from around 2017 through 2022, that logic worked perfectly. The secondary market for Richard Mille watches was extraordinary. Models bought at retail would appreciate. Some dramatically. The RM11-03, the TP-01. Watches that looked like something an alien civilization designed to test our credulity were selling for multiples of their already staggering retail prices. Then, something shifted. Global liquidity tightened. The 0.1%, the people whose lifestyle these watches were designed to signal, started moving capital differently. Not out of watches entirely. Out of momentum assets. Anything whose value is primarily story-dependent rather than substance-dependent. And Richard Mille, when you strip away the celebrity wrists and the Formula One partnerships and the tourbillon complications shaped like human hearts, is a momentum asset. The secondary market data is telling. The correction at level 7 isn't dramatic and headline-grabbing in the way a stock crash is. It's quiet and grinding. Picture a private dealer in Geneva fielding a call from a client who bought an RM at peak 2021 pricing. The client isn't panicking. The people at this level don't panic publicly. But the client wants to rotate the capital. And the dealer is carefully explaining that the number the client is expecting is no longer the number the market will pay. That conversation is happening more often than the brands would like you to know. Pieces that were commanding 40 or 50% over retail 3 years ago are now trading flat. Some are below. The buyers who purchased at peak 2021 pricing and now want to exit are discovering that the phone isn't ringing the way it used to. What level 7 sells is novelty. And novelty, unlike scarcity, unlike craftsmanship, has a half-life. In 2026, that half-life is up. The irony is that the most expensive watches in the world are currently the most financially exposed. But before we get to where safety actually lives, we need to understand why the tier just below level 7 is doing something far more quietly dangerous. Level 6, the Capital Escape, F.P. Journe, Philippe Dufour, H. Moser and C.A., Kari Voutilainen, the new establishment. That's how long the bidding lasted. On the 6th of December, 2025, in Phillips, New York, watch auction 13, a one-of-one FP. Journe FFC prototype from the personal collection of Francis Ford Coppola. 11 minutes of phone bids, room bids, and online bids. Collectors worldwide pushing a single watch through price barrier after price barrier until it landed at $10.775 million. Not only a world auction record for F.P. Journe, but a world record for any watch made by an independent watchmaker ever. That number tells you something, not just about that watch, about where serious capital is moving right now. The story of 2025 inches, the auction room is not Rolex. It's not Patek Philippe, which still commands headlines. One of the biggest headlines of 2025 is Philips achieving the highest annual total in the history of watch auctions, over $290 million. This is substantially a story about independent watchmaking. F.P. Journe and Philippe Dufour accounted for 9 of the top 10 lots at the New York sale. Not 9 of the watch lots. 9 of the top 10 lots, period. This is not a coincidence, it's capital flight. FP Journe produces roughly 900 to 1,000 watches a year, and that's it. Philippe Dufour makes perhaps 5 watches annually. H. Moser runs micro-production lines with intentional scarcity built into the model. So for them, it is not a marketing strategy, it is a philosophy. These brands cannot scale because their founders refuse to let them scale, because scaling would destroy the thing that makes them worth owning. FP Journe's Chronometra Blue retails for around $37,400. It regularly trades on the secondary market for nearly double that. Not because of hype, because genuine scarcity and genuine quality compound over time in a way that fashion brands never can. The collectors who were buying Level 5 watches, the Royal Oaks, the Nautiluses, the Perpetual Calendar Pateks, at peak 2021 pricing and holding them as investment vehicles have quietly started rotating into Level 6. The auction results are the evidence. When a collector pays $10.8 million for an FP Journe, they're not making a speculative bet. They're buying something that exists in a quantity of one, made by a man whose name is on the dial and whose hands touched every significant component of it. That is the opposite of a momentum asset. That's a substance asset. Level 6 is where the smartest money in watches is currently going, and it's going quietly, without press releases, because that's how smart money always moves. But here's what makes 2026 genuinely interesting. What's happening above Level 5 is already well documented. What's happening inside Level 5 is the part the industry press is treading carefully around. Level 5, the post-hype giants. Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, the integrated bracelet hangover. There's a before and an after in the history of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. The before era we are talking about is between 1972 and approximately 2019. Gerald Genta designs a watch on a napkin. AP makes it in steel. The watch world laughs. 47 years later, it's one of the most recognized watch cases in history and the baseline reference for expensive sports watch design. The after era we are talking about is 2019 through 2022. The Royal Oak and its cousin, the Patek Nautilus, become the central instrument of one of the most intense speculative frenzies in the history of consumer goods. The steel Royal Oak 15202 retails around $22,000. It's trading on the secondary market for over $80,000, sometimes more. The gray market has completely disconnected from authorized dealer pricing. Magazine profiles are being written about people who make their living flipping Royal Oaks they've never worn. Now, we're in the aftermath of all of that. And the aftermath is complicated. Both AP and Patek have done the rational thing. Raised retail prices aggressively to close the gap between authorized dealer pricing and secondary market reality. The problem is that in doing so, they arrived at their current price points just as the speculative frenzy was cooling. So instead of capturing the premium while demand was stratospheric, they landed at elevated retail prices right as the secondary market was normalizing. The result is a trap that every collector who bought between 2020 and 2022 is now sitting inside. Secondary market prices for Royal Oaks and Nautiluses have corrected meaningfully from peak. They haven't collapsed. But the guaranteed appreciation narrative, the story that made so many people justify paying secondary prices in the first place, is gone. What the Holy Trinity is doing in response is intelligent and worth watching. Both AP and Patek are deliberately pivoting back toward high-complication dress watches, perpetual calendars, minute repeaters, tourbillons in their classical expressions. Watches that were always the core of what these brands made before integrated bracelets dominated the conversation. The message they're sending their own market is clear. We are watchmakers, not streetwear brands. Whether the market listens is the open question of 2026. A quick detour before we get to Level 4, because there's a brand that lives between these levels that the watch community systematically undervalues, and that oversight is itself part of the story. The bonus entry. A. Lang & Söhne, Germany's most underrated answer to the Holy Trinity. Every serious watch conversation in 2026 defaults to 3 Swiss names for the top tier: Patek, AP, Vacheron. The German watchmaker, sitting one tier below them, A. Lange & Söhne, gets referenced respectfully and then left out of the conversation entirely. This is a mistake, and the 2026 market is starting to reveal just how big a mistake it is. Lang was destroyed in World War II. The Glashütte workshops, the tools, the records, everything. When East Germany collapsed in 1990, Walter Lang, the great-grandson of the founder, returned to Saxony at age 58 and rebuilt the brand from nothing. 4 years later, on the same October day in 1994, he unveiled 4 watches to the world. The watch community's response was immediate. These are among the finest mechanical watches we have ever seen. That reputation has never wavered. The Lang 1's off-center dial, the Zeitwerk's digital jumping display, the Datagraph's perfectly engineered flyback chronograph. Each is an exercise in German craftsmanship philosophy, nothing decorative that doesn't serve function, nothing functional that isn't also beautiful. Here's what makes Lang interesting in 2026 specifically. While Patek and AP are navigating the post-hype corrections on their integrated bracelet models, Lang never participated in the integrated bracelet craze. Their designs haven't changed because there was nothing wrong with them. Their secondary market is stable because it never became a speculative playground. Their waitlists exist because people want the watches, not because gray market flippers are cornering supply. In a market defined by volatility, Lang is boring in the best possible way, and boring in 2026 is very, very expensive in the best possible way. The Lang 1 retails around $30,000 and holds that value with remarkable consistency. The watch world will catch up to this eventually. It always does with things that are genuinely excellent. Now, level 4, which is where the language changes entirely because we're not talking about investment dynamics anymore. We're talking about something more fundamental. Control. Level 4, the market floor, Rolex, and to a lesser degree, Cartier, the liquid currency. Rolex raised prices 3 times in 12 months. Let that land for a second. 3 times. January 2025, May 2025, January 2026. U.S. steel models saw a cumulative increase of roughly 14 or 15% over those 12 months. Gold models significantly more. The Submariner, which was $9,500, crossed $10,000 for the first time. The GMT Master II Batman crossed $12,000. The Yellow Gold Daytona crossed $50,000. The official explanations are gold prices, tariffs, currency fluctuation, and inflation. The 15% U.S. tariff on Swiss watch imports, settled after a brief standoff at 39%, plays a real role. These are genuine pressures, but they don't fully explain the increases in steel. Steel prices haven't surged the way gold has. Manufacturing has not materially changed, and yet the steel Daytona, a stainless sports watch, has been pushed to a price point where buyers are starting to hesitate in a way they never used to. At close to 30,000 Australian dollars for a steel Daytona, the emotional equation changes. Buyers are no longer stretching, they are pausing. What Rolex is doing with pricing is only half of what makes Level 4 fascinating in 2026. The other half is the CPO program. Rolex's Certified Pre-Owned program generated $594 million in 2025, more than 10% of the entire unofficial secondary market for Rolex watches. That number is remarkable for a program that didn't exist before late 2022. It operates across 227 points of sale. And Rolex owns Bucherer, the single largest CPO dealer in the world, meaning Rolex earns margin when a watch is sold new and when it's sold pre-owned through their certified network. The gray market flipper, the person buying from authorized dealers and selling immediately at a premium, is being slowly but methodically squeezed out. The basement arbitrageur is becoming structurally obsolete. Rolex is professionalizing a market that used to operate in the gap between what they charged and what the street would pay, and they're capturing that value themselves. This is what a market floor looks like when a brand has enough discipline and enough data to construct one. Level 4 isn't about watches anymore. It's about inventory management at a scale that very few luxury goods companies have ever achieved. The one thing worth watching: steel pricing is approaching a threshold where serious collectors, not first-time buyers, but people who have been in this hobby for a decade, are crossing the street to shop AP and Patek instead. If Rolex pushes too hard on steel, they risk ceding the entry-level serious collector conversation they've owned for 40 years. They know this. The question is whether the institutional math overrides the brand instinct. But here's what genuinely surprised me in the research for this video. Level 3 doesn't have a price problem. It has something harder to fix. It has a problem, and that problem is brutal. Level 3. The identity crisis. Omega, Tudor, IWC. The aspirational gap. Let's run the numbers on the Omega Speedmaster. In 2021, the current generation Moonwatch, with the 3,861 movement, launched in Europe at around 6,100 euros. Over the 12 months, from early 2022 to early 2023 alone, Omega raised prices by 16 to 20% across the Speedmaster and Seamaster lines, depending on the model. Then again in 2023, Bloomberg reported Omega raising prices by as much as 8% in the US in 2023, with Morgan Stanley specifically flagging that the increase risked hurting sales. Then another increase in late 2025. The Hesalite Speedmaster moved from $7,300 to $7,800 in September 2025 alone, a 7% jump in a single step. And that's before we talk about servicing. The full service on a three-hand Omega, which was around $600 in late 2022, was priced at $700 by early 2023, an increase of roughly 37% in service costs in 14 months. Prices for the watch and prices for maintaining the watch moving in the same aggressive direction simultaneously. The cumulative retail effect, a watch that was around $5,000 in 2021, now retails for close to $8,000 in the United States. A 50-something% increase in 3 years. The secondary market has not kept pace. Walk through any watch forum right now. You'll find something that would have been unthinkable in 2022. Seamasters and Speedmasters trading 20 to 30% below retail on the secondary market. ADs openly discounting in markets where demand has softened. One Watch You Seek thread from mid-2024 describes a boutique having a fire sale on certain Omega references at 40% off and wasn't really quiet about it, in the poster's words. The watch that Morgan Stanley predicted would be hurt by its own price increases has been hurt by exactly that. This is the identity crisis that defines Level 3 Inch's 2026. These brands, Omega, Tudor, IWC, built their aspirational appeal on a price proposition. Swiss-made, world-famous design, serious movements without the six-figure price tag. That proposition was genuinely compelling when the Speedmaster was $5,000, or even $6,000. At $8,000, something changes. At $8,000, a serious buyer starts calculating. A used Rolex Explorer sits at $10,000 to $11,000. The Tudor Black Bay Ceramic, Tudor, Rolex's sister brand, sits at around $4,500. The gap between I can't afford Rolex and I can afford Omega is no longer self-evident. The situation is even stranger at IWC, where the Portugieser chronograph, one of the most beautiful entry-level complications in watchmaking, has crossed $6,000. And the brand's rationale for existing at this tier has become genuinely difficult to articulate. None of these brands are failing. They are genuinely making excellent watches. The Speedmaster went to the moon, and that story doesn't change. The Seamaster 300 is a legitimately great diver. But they are in the uncomfortable position of having tried to climb toward Level 4 pricing without Level 4's secondary market support, Level 4's waitlist culture, or Level 4's brand mythology. They raised prices aggressively into a market that was cooling, and now they're caught between what they cost and what the market believes they're worth. The correction will come eventually. It always does. The question is whether it comes through price reduction, which these brands would never do publicly, or through gray market discounting that quietly adjusts street pricing while MSRP stays on the wall. In 2026, the evidence suggests gray market discounting is already doing the work. And here's where it gets interesting. Because levels 7 through 3 are all dealing with some version of the same problem. They are watches that were overextended on price, and they're living with the consequences. But the next two levels are having a completely different experience. Level 2. The squeezed middle. Tissot, Hamilton, Oris, Longines. The entry-level sacrifice. Here's something the watch industry doesn't like to say in public. The sub-$1,000 Swiss watch is disappearing. Not the watches themselves, they still exist, but the credibility of the sub-1,000 Swiss watch, its ability to claim the aspirational middle ground between Japanese automatic and serious Swiss, is under structural pressure from both directions simultaneously. From above, Level 3 brands racing each other to raise prices have been raising the floor of aspirational Swiss without realizing they were also raising the bar of what entry-level buyers expect for their money. When Omega costs $8,000, Swiss-made stops being a satisfying answer at $1,500. From below, Japanese watchmaking has done something extraordinary over the last 5 years. The Seiko GMT SSK 001, a mechanical GMT complication with an in-house movement, retails at $475. The Tissot PRX Powermatic, which competes aesthetically with watches at triple the price, now retails at $850. And the Swatch Group, which owns Tissot, has been pushing that price upward relentlessly. US tariffs on Swiss imports settled at 15%, significantly higher than the 2 to 3% that was traditional before 2025, have created a permanent price delta between US and European markets for brands like Tissot and Hamilton. The Hamilton Khaki Field Auto, which many considered the quintessential Swiss-made under $500 purchase for years, is approaching $800 at retail in 2026. The entry-level Honest Swiss Field Watch has effectively exited the $500 conversation. What fills the vacuum? Two things. First, Japanese and German microbrands operating below Level 2's price floor with genuine quality. This is not new, but it's accelerating. The buyer who was going to spend $800 on a Hamilton is now buying a Seiko Presage style 60s at $500 and getting a better-looking watch. The buyer who was going to spend $1,200 on a Tissot PRX Powermatic is discovering the Orient Star Classic with its open heart movement and in-house automatic at half the price and wondering why they were ever considering anything else. The vacuum is being filled faster than Level 2 brands seem to realize. Second, gray market and pre-owned pricing on Level 2 and Level 3 brands, which allows buyers to access the Swiss-made cachet at prices the brands themselves refuse to sell at retail. A used Hamilton or Tissot at 30% below current MSRP looks completely different when you factor in the tariff-inflated retail prices of 2026. The pre-owned market is capturing buyers that the primary market is pricing out. The brands at Level 2 are aware of this. The strategic response, so far, has been to keep raising prices and maintain the fiction that the aspirational middle ground still exists. At some point, the market will decide whether they're right. The smart bet in 2026, they are not right. Which brings us to Level 1. And this is where 2026 gets its most ironic twist. Because the safest, most structurally sound level in the entire watch market right now is also the cheapest. And that is not a coincidence. Level 1, the integrity tier. Casio, Seiko, Timex, and the Japanese ecosystem broadly, the anti-hype refuge. Something happened in watch culture somewhere around 2023 that the industry press underreported. The audience for serious watch content, YouTube channels, Reddit communities, the forums that track secondary market prices and debate movement quality, started producing a very specific kind of video with a very specific thesis. The thesis went roughly like this. I spent 30 years climbing the watch ladder. I own references at every level. And the watches I actually wear are the $60 G-Shock and the $400 Seiko. These videos went viral, not among beginners, among serious collectors. A guy wearing a Patek Philippe Calatrava to a cocktail party makes a certain kind of statement. The same guy who reaches for the beaten G-Shock before a long weekend because he simply doesn't want to think about what's on his wrist, that's a different statement entirely. It's the statement of someone who has resolved the anxiety that drove him up the watch ladder in the first place. That's the signal. When people who own Royal Oaks are making content about what they actually reach for every morning, and the answer is a Casio, something structural is being communicated. What's being communicated is this. Level 1 never lied to you. The Casio DW5600 is $60. It has been essentially the same watch since 1983. It will tell you the time precisely forever, survive anything you put it through, and ask absolutely nothing of you in return. There is no wait list, because supply is not artificially constrained. There is no secondary market premium because Casio makes them for anyone who wants one. There is no gray market crisis, no tariff anxiety, no forum debate about whether the brand is overvalued. The watch is not an asset. It is a tool, and as an honest tool at an honest price, it has never been bettered. Virgil Abloh put it on the runway. Supreme collaborates with G-Shock. A Bathing Ape does too. Not because Casio paid them, because the silhouette is perfect and the cultural authenticity is unimpeachable. That's a form of brand strength that marketing departments at level 5 brands spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to manufacture and never quite achieve. Seiko sits at a different tier of the same philosophy. The Seiko 5 sports line, the SRPD references, the SSK 001 GMT represents Japanese in-house automatic watchmaking at prices that Swiss brands cannot approach. The SSK 001's 4R34 caliber is the first in-house automatic GMT movement available under $500 from any mainstream watchmaker. That is a genuine achievement, not a marketing achievement. An engineering and manufacturing achievement that Seiko could only pull off because they own the entire production chain, and the market is recognizing it. The flight to utility that defines Level 1-inch 2026 is not a budget phenomenon. It's a values phenomenon. Collectors who have spent years buying stories, heritage stories, investment stories, status stories are buying utility instead. The watch that works, costs, honestly, and carries none of the anxiety of watching secondary market prices every quarter. The irony is rich. Level 1 is winning precisely because levels 3 through 7 have priced themselves into turbulence. The more confused the upper levels become, the cleaner Level 1 looks by comparison. Casio didn't engineer this. Seiko didn't plan it. They just kept doing what they'd always done, making honest watches for honest prices. And in 2026, that's become the most radical thing in the industry. So here's the map, clearly. Level 7 is correcting. The momentum assets, the skull tourbillons and carbon fiber wrist machines, are experiencing the exact price softening that happens when the global liquidity of the ultra-wealthy tightens. Avoid unless you are the type of collector who genuinely doesn't need money to be involved in the decision at all. Level 6 is ascending. Independent watchmakers Journe, Dufour, Voutilainen are attracting serious capital that's rotating out of levels 4 and 5. The barriers to entry are high. The pieces are scarce in ways that cannot be manufactured. If you're already in this tier, the 2025 auction results are your validation. If you're not, the entry point keeps moving. Level 5 is recalibrating. Patek and AP are doing the intelligent thing, pivoting back to complications and away from integrated bracelet hype. The Royal Oak and Nautilus are still extraordinary watches. They're just not guaranteed appreciation vehicles anymore. Buy them because you love them, not because of what they'll be worth in 5 years, because that math is no longer reliable. Lange & Söhne sits between 5 and 6 and is structurally undervalued relative to what it offers. The German watches hold value quietly and without drama. In a drama-saturated market, that's an underrated quality. Most people who own one have no desire to sell. That tells you everything. Level 4 is playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. Rolex's CPO program, its price increases, its inventory management, all of it is part of a long game to own the secondary market as thoroughly as they own the primary one. The steel pricing is approaching a threshold. Watch carefully. Level 3 is in genuine trouble. The math on Omega and IWC doesn't work when you run it against Level 4 secondary pricing. Gray market discounts are already the story. MSRP is increasingly a number that exists on the wall of the boutique and nowhere else. Level 2 is shrinking. The honest entry point for Swiss watchmaking has moved. Tariffs, Japanese competition. Level 3 price creep from above the sub-1,000 Swiss proposition is under pressure. It may not survive in its current form. Level 1 is winning, not by competing, by refusing to play the game everyone else is playing. Casio makes $60 watches, Seiko makes $475 GMTs. Neither brand has a PR problem, a secondary market crisis, or an identity crisis. They have something better. They have customers who trust them. In 2026, that's rarer than it sounds. If this changed how you watch the watch market, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good reason to start. The next video goes somewhere nobody's talking about. You'll want to watch that one.